Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I say good morning because that's what it is in the US. Some of our US contributors, it's nearly 8 o'clock in the morning. And welcome to the Civic University Network conference session, which we've given the title Civic Universities Across the World. My name's John Goddard, and I am the Professor of Universities and Cities in the University of Birmingham in the UK. And formerly Vice Chair of the UK Civic University Commission. I will co-host this session alongside Rafael Trapasso of the OECD, who we've worked with in organising this session. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping messages for everyone. The webinar will be recorded and made available after the conference via the network members area. You can use the chat functions throughout the session for general commentary and discussion, and make sure to send to all panelists and attendees. If you have a question to put to the panel, please use the Q&A function on your bottom toolbar. Do not post panel questions in the chat as they may not be seen. For optimal viewing experience, please select to hide non-video participants. The instructions to do this are in the chat function. Okay, well, let's kick things off. We chose to partner with the OECD for a number of reasons. First, going back to the early 2000s, the OECD conducted around 40 self-assessments and peer reviews of universities and regional collaborations, and published it in a summary under the title Globally Competitive and Locally Engaged. This title still seems highly relevant to where UK civic universities now find themselves. Second, as an intergovernmental organisation, OECD, but with some degree of independence, in the case of OECD, this work revealed a tension between national policies for higher education, for research, and for territorial development. And those divisions are still relevant today, not least in the UK. Third reason we partnered with them was to bridge how the OECD had attempted to bridge this gap by this particular group, which Rafael heads, has linked with developed a particular focus on the geography of higher education, a dimension to higher education policy which is sadly lacking in many member states of the OECD. The group is indeed also in turn, Rafael will tell us more about this, the OECD Centre for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, and Regions and Cities. A combination which I think is highly relevant to the UK Civic University Network and our agenda about levelling up and building more competitive places in different parts of the United Kingdom. So this brings me to the focus of today, namely the recognition that the concerns of civic universities in the UK to work together collectively and with local partners in the private, voluntary sectors to benefit local communities is now, we think, part of a global movement. This engagement of the university with its communities in the round, people, institutions, economy, and society. Indeed, the title of this conference is The Civic University Movement. We think we're on the cusp of something big that's happening across the globe. And just in the parts we're looking at today, these are common themes. So we want to use the opportunity of the Civic University Conference to share international experience in, and here I'm reading very carefully what I've written, establishing learning and policy shaping networks of universities committed to work with others in contributing to the economic, social, and environmental well-being of their communities. So how can we create these learning networks? That's what we're trying to focus on today. So in rapid succession, we will consider first the role of transnational organizations such as OECD, including its role within the European Commission. So the OECD as an organization that can facilitate this process. Second, a US national network of land-grant universities, which has been long established and has a lot of experience on how to do this. Third, individual cross-national university and city partnerships between the UK and the US. Now, I recognize that this is not the world. It's just mainly Anglo-American. And there's a whole nother issue about working with the Global South, which will be a subject of another conference. There will be a particular focus on the role of policymakers and funders from inside and particularly outside of higher education, and their concern, those funders, to assess the local impact of research and teaching by civic universities. How do we measure and assess what works and what doesn't work? We'll end with a panel discussion where we ask members to draw out lessons for the UK Civic University Network and UK policymakers. Then there will be an opportunity at the end for question and answers with the panel and all the speakers. So put your questions in the Q&A, and I and Raphael will field them across the panel and the individual speakers. As in other sessions, at key points, there will be an opportunity for all participants to express their opinion by responding to a brief polling exercise. We found this quite useful to get a sense of the feeling of the meeting. So we'll stop and just do that, and the office will fix that up. So without more ado, I will now ask Raphael Trapazzo to introduce the work of OECD. The floor is yours.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Professor Godard. It's a great pleasure to be connected with you today in this event co-organized by the Civic University Movement and the OECD. I would like to keep this interaction very conversational, and so I didn't prepare any slides for better connecting with you. But the point, let me introduce something that John already said. You know, probably the OECD, the way in which is typically organized, the OECD mirrors a little bit the structure and the form of government. So it means that our directorates are sort of ministries responding to specific policy sector questions, except that at a certain point, it was clear 10 years ago, they started to do that some of the issues, especially concerning SMEs, entrepreneurship, labor market skills, are very much horizontal, and they need to be dealt with by generating synergies and complementarities, or at least reducing trade-offs between policy sectors. And for this reason, there was the creation of this Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions and Cities. You see that there is also a spatial dimension and a multi-level governance dimension that can work transversally across policy sectors and also in cooperation with different levels of government. That is fundamentally important in this period of in which challenges assume spatialized characteristics. This is the cradle in which the current work on universities, higher education institutions, I should say, took off. And the project that John referred was a first attempt. And that first attempt, created the condition, paved the way to other more structured attempts. 10 years ago already, the OECD, the center, started this collaboration with the European Commission, and in particular with the DG Education and Culture, with the idea of generating an holistic approach supporting universities becoming more entrepreneurial and innovative. Now, because of the way these networks work, and it's not always a good practice, I had the impression that alternative narratives of a connected, engaged university emerged. So HR Innovate, the Entrepreneurial University, the Civic University. And I'm happy that today we are all together to recompose that narratives. Because at the end of the day, HR Innovate is a very useful tool because express this soft power, this possibility to help and provide assistance to universities and higher education institutions that want to engage more with their ecosystems, with their communities, with a little bit the excuse, if you like, of this entrepreneurship, like the startup buzz. My reality is very much focused on the mindset, so on the capacity to generate an idea, a new set of skills, bundle of skills that support individuals engaging with problem solving, being very flexible, and also supports the knowledge exchange and collaboration. This was upon the request of higher education institutions, in the sense that this movement in reality emerges not from the policy side. There is no stick or carrots, but really what we see is that universities, and this network is a little bit the proof of that, university really try to play a more important role, to engage with the community, to engage with their stakeholders. Only they have not always the capacity, the function, the incentives, the professional figures, the platforms to do that successfully. So in this experiment with the European Commission, there was a Higher Education Innovate, we at a certain point realized that there was a missing piece, and that piece was geography. So identifying a clear spatial dimension in which improving, operating, implementing our discussion with higher education institutions. So it's a sort of spin-off that then encompasses, I would say, it's a broader platform, the geography of higher education, because it can go outside Europe, well, in all sense. It can go below the national level, so assessing regional ecosystems, and can introduce new form of policy dialogue, because at the end of the day, one of our peculiarity is that we operate at the crossroads of different policy areas, including higher education, innovation, skills, regional development. And we can talk the different policy languages in a way that complete, if you want, also the way in which the OECD reports are done or the OECD assessments are done. I remember while working on regional development, we of course recognize the value, the importance of higher education institutions for the regional ecosystem. And we were trying to provide recommendations to involve, to embed those higher education institutions in regional strategy. Only that our knowledge of the process stopped on the door of higher education institutions. We were ignorant. We didn't know about all the challenges and all the policy issues behind that door. That's the reason why we think that this is a very important opportunity. And a third point that I need to make is that this is an opportunity. So the post-COVID, hopefully, the post-COVID phase is about to start or has started. And this will be a moment of discontinuity in the way in which policies were designed, implemented, in which policy constituencies and policy alliances were formed. It's a moment of extreme mobilization of all possible means, all possible stakeholders, and is a moment in which institutions that are very capillary, they're very distributed in space, they have possibly good connections with their network, with their stakeholders, are invaluable sources of intelligence, information about investment opportunities at the regional or ecosystem level, which is needed to improve the absorptive capacity of regions vis-a-vis all this investment from the central or supranational level in some cases. So this generates the urgency for us to promote a new approach, a new way to discuss higher education policy and higher education institutions in a version, in a vision of regional development and or regional innovation, of course, and provides us also with the opportunity to experiment different policy solutions and different policy approaches without like functions in many countries, this idea that evaluation is to allocate funds or to generate rankings. We do not want to do that. We want to work with university to learn, to understand what is the dynamic, and then we can think about investing for generating the competence, the professional figures, the incentives, the career opportunities, etc., etc. We have done successfully a first report of the geography of higher education on the Karlstad University because of their Academy for Smart Specialization. This is a very good practice. So I will try to put the link in the chat during the event to give you the possibility to thumb through that document. And we have also now an engagement with Canada, in particular with Quebec, where we can we will be able to do our first fully fledged large scale geography of higher education review. But these, in reality, as I said, are opportunities for this network to learn from other pieces of other places in the world, other constituencies. I'm very happy today that we are in the UK virtually, that we are connected with the US, and that there is this ambition to connect to larger and new networks of university that want to make the world a better place. Thank you very much. John, I think that this is the end of the beginning.
Thanks very much. That's terrific. I mean, I'm mostly lots of important points there. Soft power, I think, is an important concept you've introduced, and the whole idea of this agenda emerging from the bottom upwards, but needing platforms, and the whole idea of experimental evaluation, not developmental evaluations rather than judgmental evaluations. I think those are very important points. Now, I think you're going to have the chair because you're going to introduce the land grant university's story. So can I hand over the chair to you?
Yes, thank you very much. And I'm very happy to chair this this session. What we have, I mean, you're probably familiar with the US Association of Public and Land Grant Universities. We have with us Sheila Martin, who is the Vice President in charge of engagement. Good morning, Sheila, for you. And Stephen Giavazzi, that works also at the Ohio State University and in the network. Now, without further ado, I would like to start introducing the discussion with a first question to Sheila, so that Sheila can also help me present the work of the APLU. So, Sheila, thank you for being with us. First of all, it's a pleasure to see you again. And how does the APLU work for its members? This is a first question for you, Sheila. Floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Raphael, and thanks to the organizers of this conference. I'm happy to be here with my partner in crime, Steve Giavazzi. We work together on quite a bit of things related to university engagement in land-grant universities. The APLU actually includes public and land-grant universities. So some of our members are not land grants, but they are public universities. And we work to improve their practice of engagement with their communities, with their regional economies in particular, by really building a community of practice that researches, documents, and celebrates the kinds of partnerships that are most impactful in really fully realizing the potential for universities to have a transformative effect on a region. And we encourage our members to think about their different missions of teaching, research, and engagement as very deeply entwined with each other. One of the more visible ways that we do that is through a designation and awards program that we run called the Innovation and Economic Prosperity as Universities program. So through this program, universities pursue the designation. So they go through a process that provides them a designation called the Innovation and Economic Prosperities University. So it gives them bragging rights to say that they have achieved this designation, and then they can compete for awards. But it's much more than just sort of getting to the point where they can proclaim that they have this designation. It really is a community of practice, and they go through this process with a cohort. And they go through a pretty intensive self-study process where they are engaging internally and externally to gain a better understanding of what they're doing well and what they're doing not so well, and how they might improve their engagement with their local economies and with their local communities. So, we use a particular framework in order to help universities think about their engagement that is based on really 3 realms of impact. The first is talent and workforce development, which of course people think of as the main job of a university. It captures the impact of the university on the education and skills of its graduates and generally on the regional population. And then second, innovation, capturing the impact that a university has on the technology base of the region, its entrepreneurial ecosystem, and that consequently the technology-based economy, or sort of skills-based economy in the region. And then finally, place, which captures the university's impact on its quality of life, its ability to solve social problems, its partnerships with community organizations that have missions directed toward equity, justice, and human rights. So talent, innovation, and place, these are the 3 factors that we encourage our universities to look at. And we really focus on the intersection between these 3. And that's really where universities can have the greatest impact. And as I mentioned before, we like to encourage them to think of their missions as being aligned. So for example, with respect to the talent focus, we know that engaged learning is a high impact practice. So how can we encourage universities to implement engaged learning strategies where students are in the community, having an impact, learning about civic engagement, and also sort of thinking about how they might apply some of those skills in their profession in the future. And then also tying that, many students also get involved in undergraduate research. So tying that to innovation, learning about the scientific process, applying their skills in that way. We also hope that these graduates will learn entrepreneurship skills so that they can contribute to new companies and new industries, focus on advancing the competitiveness of existing and emerging companies and industries. And finally, we hope that they're generating talent in a way that furthers equitable development and furthers social mobility. So we really try to help institutions to make sure that they're aligned internally around that work and that they're coordinated with their community partners in doing that work. So we help them develop and implement a coordinated strategy using input from their stakeholders to determine whether and how they can best connect with their economies. So I have other things to share, but I think I'm just going to leave it there for now and let Steve contribute at this point.
Thank you, Sheila. I really like this approach of entrepreneurial ecosystems and these engaged teaching activities. I think that these are very, very important insights for this network. So, Professor Gravazzi, Stephen, now from you are the partner in crime of Sheila, as she said. What are the challenges facing land-grant universities in the coming years, according to you, Stephen? Please, the floor is yours.
Sure. Thanks so much. I appreciate that. So in order to answer that question, I think we have to go backward in time and ask ourselves what was happening before the pandemic hit. And I think that Sheila really nailed it in terms of universities finding their way towards the economic development message in terms of why are universities still as relevant today as they have been for the past 150 some years in this country. When the pandemic hit, what we actually saw was there were multiple pandemics, right? So we had COVID-19, but here in America, we also had a great deal of social unrest due to racial justice issues. And quite frankly, if anyone's been paying attention to the politics in this country, we have had deepening political polarization. And so we've really been dealing with multiple pandemics at the same time. The question then becomes, as we begin to come out of the healthcare crisis, what is it that universities are going to be able to do to continue that message about, yes, we are relevant to economic development issues, but how is it that we're also relevant in terms of the social needs related to racial justice? And also, how is it that we can play a part in dampening down some of the political polarization that's been happening? So there are a lot of different ways that I think that we can do that. But one of the things that I would also like to point out here in the United States, the difference between a land-grant university and all other public universities is cooperative extension services. So there were three major congressional actions that built the land-grant university. The Morrill Act of 1862, which gave us the teaching mission, and then the Hatch Act in 1887, which gave us the research mission, and then the Smith-Lever Act of 1914, which gave us the mission of connecting to communities. And it's really then the Smith-Lever Act that gave rise to statewide organizations of what we call extension agents, where we literally have placed professionals in each and every county in every state that has created a statewide network, and also by virtue of the fact that they are all connected, a national network as well. So part of the issue for the United States and the land-grant universities here is, how is it that extension services can get out of its historic mission, which has been primarily aimed at agriculture and primarily aimed at rural issues? And how is it that they can become part of the technological revolution that's going on and also include major urban issues as well? And so I think that, as Sheila pointed out, the talent, the innovation in place, really, which started with those three missions of teaching, research, and service or engagement, are going to be radically challenged in the 21st century, especially post-pandemic, and I think especially as we deal with healthcare issues, the politics that I mentioned, and also the racial justice issues. And again, I have more to say about that, but I'm going to stop there.
Thank you, Stephen. No, this was interesting. Also a capacity that I think it's quite, I don't know, peculiar, but important in the US, of involving higher education institutions in the delivery of federal policies. You mentioned the extension for farming. There is also the manufacturing extension program, and there is also SBDC. So it's this capacity to embed actors in federal and state policies that I think is a valuable practice that we should take into account on this side of the Atlantic. You know, now a question to both of you. Perhaps Sheila can go first. What are the lessons from the land-grant universities for other higher education systems? I introduced a little bit this issue, but Sheila, please go ahead.
Well, one of the things that I've been thinking about quite a bit lately is the humility that we need to bring to our work, and not something that universities are known for. And in fact, we can sometimes have a bad habit of just dropping in on community partners when we need something, like a letter of cooperation for a grant. And then, you know, if the funding doesn't appear, or even if it does, and we work through the project and then we drop out. You know, and I have probably been guilty of that myself throughout my career. But what I've learned is that if a partner is important for a university, it is worth spending the time to develop a partnership that has some mutually beneficial objectives that universities and their partners want to work on for the long term. Transparent, clear objectives on both sides. And if those objectives are important to both parties, then you will find a way to move forward on that agenda, regardless of whether a particular grant comes through or not. So, you know, I think that that's really one of the things that's been an important lesson to me, is that these partnerships take time. They require development of trust, and that is the only way that these partnerships really lead to sustained outcomes. I think for the civic partners, though, it's important to realize that the university has pressures as well that, you know, that also requires that, that they stay with the partnership through the long run. So, you know, I can't tell you how many times I've answered the phone and someone's asked me, do you have a group of students that could do a project for us for free? It doesn't really work that way. What we want to do is develop long-term relationships that bring students into the equation, bring the research into the equation, and help us work towards these long-term shared objectives with our civic partners.
Thank you, Sheila. Stephen.
Well, with the very little bit of time that we have remaining, let me be brief. I will riff off of what Sheila said about the humility. And I think that the other side of that on the university's part is to become more welcoming in terms of diversities of opinion. We have a really bad reputation in the United States of having very left-leaning universities. And I think that unfortunately, there are large segments of the community who believe that the university is no longer relevant to them because they do not have a voice there. So I really think that all public and land grant universities really need to redouble their efforts to become the marketplace of ideas that made our university so great for the last 150 years.
Thank you to both of you. It's fantastic because we covered this issue of long-term and openness. And I think that this is something that in which higher education institutions can really play a role, helping, proactively helping society and communities to improve the demand for innovation, for inclusiveness, and for sustainability. I think this session is over perfectly on time.
Okay, well done.
John, the floor is back to you.
Okay. The next, before we proceed, we're going to have a little poll, and so the office will put up a poll for you to vote on, and then we'll move into the next session, and we'll probably slide into that. So could you, Shireen, put the poll up? So just have a look at these questions. It's just an opinion poll. It doesn't hold you to anything. Just look at those questions. How relevant is the experience of the US to your university and its relationship with your city? In the light of what you've heard about the Civic, how would you think it'd be funded? We haven't discussed funding that, but it is an important issue. So I think we'll leave the poll up, and I think the next session is going to be about bilateral partnerships between individual UK universities and the US counterparts. And we'll start off with the partnership between Newcastle University and with Pittsburgh University, which has been developing over the years. And I'll give the floor first to Ariel Armani, who's the Vice President for Global Affairs in Pittsburgh University. The floor is yours.
Thank you, John. Thank you. I'm going to focus on a specific question which is how do we build global partnerships that emphasize the interrelationship between universities and their local communities? And so to address this question, I'll share our experience advancing a partnership between Newcastle University and the University of Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh and Newcastle are both universities situated in post-industrial cities that have had to reinvent themselves and facing significant challenges in the form of socioeconomic and racial divides, aging populations, infrastructure problems, and economic development. Successful post-industrial cities navigated the sunsetting of industrial production, reorient into intellectual technology, advanced manufacturing, business services, and life science innovations. And yet, as we know, the challenges that follow industrial decline, such as loss of population, unemployment, and destructive urban redevelopment strategies, as well as long-standing cleavages and social racial injustices, reverberate through these cities today. So these two universities are found within cities undergoing complex transformations, and while they are similar, they navigate these transformations in unique ways. So why is this partnership interesting? Our vision and ambition for the partnership is based on three principles. First, we linked the partnership to our distinctive and shared experiences. Our two cities shape the world as pioneers in heavy industry and share similar consequences of that legacy, both locally and globally. It is from this legacy that the two universities work with partners to shape a sustainable and inclusive future. So in other words, we rely on a strong narrative that emphasizes our shared economic and social legacies with the theme of bridging the past and future. This narrative was instrumental in shaping the values that underlie our collaboration, such as commitment to sustainability, and now the challenge of rebuilding communities and working toward a new equilibrium among social, economic, political, and environmental systems. So first, an emphasis on our similar economic and social legacies, which help define our sense of mission and the nature of our connections with local communities. Second, we view this effort as a partnership between places, through an engagement with policymakers, civil society organizations, communities, and citizens, which is different from a traditional partnership focused solely between universities. So the second principle is a conceptual and pragmatic shift from a model of partnership between institutions of higher education to a model of partnership between places. And third, from the very start, we envision this partnership as a continuous experiment. We charge ourselves with the task of constantly reflecting upon our collaboration, remaining open to changing and adapting our course of action. In particular, we are very interested in leveraging our links to our local communities to incorporate their ideas, views, needs, and input into the partnership. This has created a dynamic relationship that has the potential to test new models for place-based global partnerships. So this third and final principle is constant experimentation and innovation. We are incubating new ways to partner with a place-based focus. So with these principles as our framework, we identified areas that represent major challenges for our cities and regions based on our long-standing engagement with our local communities and civic partners. For example, healthy aging, just and inclusive cities, sustainable energy, water and air quality, and culture and creative industries. We also envision a path to building linkages with institutions of higher education in the global South. The University of Sao Paulo, for example, found within places that share similar histories and challenges, as well as fundamental differences that enrich the collaboration, seeking to establish a place-based global network with the goal of addressing global challenges with local impact. So using the term popularized by Blair Shepard, we think and act as globally minded localists.
Okay.
Last January, we organized a major conference that used the UN Sustainable Development Goals to provide a framework for post-industrial cities and the universities that reside within them. The goal of the conference was to seed conversations that would allow collaborations among universities and civic partners alike to catalyze research that focuses on pressing questions impacting our respective cities and others like them. So my colleague Jane Robinson will tell you more about this experience, the present and future of our collaboration, and the ongoing work on our place-based global network. Jane?
Thank you. Jane, could you now take the floor, please?
Thank you very much, and thank you, Ariel. I'll keep my comments brief, but I think just to reflect that the conference title was the role of universities in inclusive, just and sustainable cities, and really reinforce those principles that Ariel has outlined. I think also to just emphasize that this was about a place-to-place engagement, not just institution to institution. So our conference included political and civic leaders, community representatives, students and academic colleagues, focusing on themes that were relevant to both places, as Ariel's described. And we saw this conference as a catalyst for conversations and experimentation and shared learning. Two very specific examples of things that have really emerged from the partnership that have had an impact on our respective cities. I think the first is around utilization of the UN SDGs framework. Pittsburgh was the second city in the US to adopt the UN SDGs. And what we've seen in Newcastle is learning from some of those experiences to inform the framework for the recovery and renewal plan that we've been developing with partners in the city. The second is a very practical example of student-led community engagement through the Northeast Solidarity Together programme, which was led by our students working with asylum seekers and refugees, and has been something where we've shared the learning and worked with colleagues in Pittsburgh who've been interested in developing a similar model there. To facilitate these kind of conversations, we've launched a Global Engagement Fellows Programme, which provides seed corn funding to facilitate partnerships between academics, professional service colleagues, and our partners between Newcastle and Pittsburgh to work on real life shared problems and to look at innovation to see how we can apply research and education in a way that is going to benefit both places. So as Ariel said, we have aspirations to build the partnership, and we have many connections already with universities in South America, and also actually very strong links with Glasgow University. So it'll be great to hear from them shortly. Quick plug is that our next conference is planned for the 23rd to the 25th of March 2022. So if people are interested, there's a link in the chat now, and we'll be able to find out much more about it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jane. And now I think I will move on quickly now to hear from the Glasgow Metro Lab network. And I think Ben Levine is going to speak first. Ben, the floor is yours.
Excellent. Well, thank you, John. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. This has been really interesting and great to see a number of folks that we've worked with at Metro Lab on the line here. I know time is short, so I'm just going to cover a couple quick points, and then we'll turn it over to Des, and we'll be happy to follow up with any questions. I want to talk about two things. One is just introduce MetroLab to this group to the extent that you may not be familiar. And then second, talk just briefly about kind of the moment that we're in, at least in the United States from a policy perspective, and what opportunities may be out there for the civic university style collaboration. So MetroLab is a network of cities and universities across the United States. And we have a few partners in the UK, and we have a few partners in Canada. And our focus, I sort of think about it in three pillars. The first is, how do we drive forward institutionalized partnerships between local governments and universities? We're talking about partnerships that have buy-in from the senior most leadership at particular institutions, but also are deeply embedded across disciplines within universities and across departments or across functions in local government. And what we're ultimately trying to do is both create front doors where these two institutions can meet, but also create a set of infrastructure that can last through mayoral transitions, can last through different turnover within the city, within the university, and ultimately create a mechanism for communities to leverage the intellectual assets that exist at universities, whether we're talking about faculty or students or the reputation of the institution, leverage that to address public policy priorities like transportation, urban planning, sustainability, housing, social service delivery, and more. The second objective of MetroLab is, once you've created a set of those partnerships across the country or internationally, how do you connect those as a network? How do you learn from each other? How do you scale projects? How do you think about a broader community or a broader kind of academic community of civic researchers, an academic community, by the way, that cuts across function, that cuts across discipline, cuts across job type. A lot of public sector folks who are really academically inclined and are key partners. I think that's complicated. A lot of academic disciplines were formed decades ago or centuries ago. And so we really see this interesting opportunity to consolidate around an interdisciplinary community. The third area that we're focused on is connecting that community to a set of national and international stakeholders that either fund projects or are important conveners. So we're talking about federal agencies, philanthropy, multinational organizations. And one of the reasons why I think I'm particularly interested in engaging in this conversation is all those linkages. A good example of how at MetroLab we've been focused on this, and this is a US specific example, but I think could be a model for increased activity and investment in the types of work that we're discussing, is a program called the Civic Innovation Challenge. And so at MetroLab, we helped design a federal competition in partnership with the National Science Foundation. We helped sort of craft a competition in 2020. NSF launched the Civic Innovation Challenge. It's an $11 million competition funded by NSF, the Department of Energy, and Department of Homeland Security. And it's organized around specific problem statements related to mobility and resilience. These were priorities that came from a broad set of communities. And there are currently 52 projects that are funded across the country during an initial phase of work. And those teams are all competing for a subsequent year-long $1 million implementation grant, or a set of those grants. About 8 of those grants will be awarded later this fall. And so we embedded a lot of design features and programming into this competition in order to offer more support, more capacity building, team building, political pressure to really implement projects on a timeline that is suitable both for academic and civic audiences. So that's a bit about MetroLab, and I'd be happy to discuss more. I'm gonna just quickly mention 2 things. The first is that we're at an interesting moment in the United States. There's a program called the Endless Frontiers, or a legislative package called the Endless Frontiers Act that has bipartisan support and would dramatically increase research and technology funding in the United States. And so I'm particularly intrigued by the opportunity to connect what will be increased, if this passes, which is likely, increased resources for research and development in the technology fields in the United States with real life grounded sort of problem statements in communities. I think that's incredibly important and something that we're going to be focused on. And then the second thing, and I don't think there's time to talk about this, so I'll just drop it into the chat. I wrote a paper that might be interesting for this group, focused on how civic research could be invested in by a federal government. This is written from a US perspective, but could be relevant for a UK or EU or OECD perspective. So I'll just drop the link in the chat, but there's a number of concrete examples that I think would be beneficial. And so with that, I'll stop and turn it over to Des.
Thanks very much, Ben. I suppose from our perspective in Glasgow, what was attractive about linking up with MetroLab was really the focus on the use of data and data analytics, capacity within universities to help cities to address problems. So we're really interested in translatable solutions and new ways of doing things. There seem to be a lot of really interesting individual projects underway in US cities that were kind of gathered together and profiled through MetroLab, but also the ways in which the cities and universities interacted with each other seemed to us to be very attractive, and that there were examples there that we wanted to learn from. I think what we did kind of get from MetroLab was a sense of the importance of dynamic leadership at city level, so political leadership and the way in which the universities and the cities cooperated together, although it was different in different places, but it was a common theme. The importance to cities' point of view of bringing in talent, particularly in terms of data and the handling of data, in order to bring forward solutions, and the opportunities that opened out for universities to cooperate. The entrepreneurial and problem-orientated approach that seems to be characteristic in the US, much more, I would say, than in the UK. In the UK, we tend to look to central government to give us money to do things, whereas in the US, cities, in a sense, have to do things themselves and really kind of develop their own approaches and their own solutions in partnership with local partners. And there's a very strong kind of civic collective orientation in many parts of the USA, and also a lot of community-led delivery, things that will be delivered in the UK through local government or through institutional structures. In the US are delivered by community organizations with the support of philanthropy or business. So all this generates a different dynamic, I think, in the US. And the diversity of the country and different types of university and civic government actually just generates a whole series of different ways of doing things. It's much less uniform in the US than in the UK. And very, very strongly focused on practical ways forward, solving particular problems, thinking of new ways of doing things. And that kind of opening out of what is needed at city level inspires a positive response from the universities. So in a sense, it's a kind of cultural dynamic that operates that I think we in the UK have got a lot that we can learn from. We've picked up from MetroLab lots of really interesting things. I mean, the work that Charlie Catlett and the University of Chicago has done on building relationships, longer term relationships with civic partners, work that's been done in other parts of the USA on solving flooding issues and linking them to homelessness, a whole raft of different approaches, some of which relate directly to what we do in the UK, some of which are kind of different, but different in ways that actually spark you to do new things. And what we've also done, I think, as well as link with MetroLab as a partnership, we've developed links with particular universities within and cities within MetroLab. So for example, we've got strong relationships with Pittsburgh, as does Newcastle, and also with Carnegie Mellon as well as with the University of Pittsburgh. Other relationships across the USA with Georgia Tech, for example. So we've got things that we can learn from US partners, but they're also keen to learn from us. I mean, one thing that's really encouraging is the openness of US partners to actually think about our ways of doing things and whether they're actually things that they can learn from us. And I think this is something which is quite strongly supported by certainly the UK government in the USA. So we've had lots of support from the Commonwealth Office to take forward these partnerships. and to develop links with US universities, which has probably become all the more important in the context of, if you like, Britain's repositioning in the world. I mean, many of us will have different views about Brexit, but I think one of the opportunities is to develop, new types of relationship with other countries, and particularly, I would say, with the US. So we've got particular projects that we're wanting to take forward with MetroLab. I think this process of engagement has actually led to concrete projects linked to COP26, for example, which is taking place in Glasgow. But the whole exercise of it has actually been very positive, not just, as I say, linking with Ben and his colleagues who manage MetroLab, but dealing with the individual academic leads and the city officials who are taking it forward. And it just exposes you to a whole different way of looking things in a new world in a very positive way. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Des and Ben. And so I think now that's very, start my video. Thanks very much for both of you, for all the four in this. I've learned a lot here and put various things in the chat about experimentation, building groups of universities and cities working together to configure calls for funding from the research funders, NSF. Lots of lessons there for the UK about how the Civic University Network could operate going forward. So thank you very much, all of you, for that. We've certainly got a recording of this, and we will need to go digest it in more detail as we look forward to the development of the Civic University Network. So now it's the results of the poll have just come very encouraging. How can we learn from elsewhere? Everyone thinks that's relevant. That's very important. And a question about funding, which I think is an issue, we'll probably come back to it, because I don't think any of our speakers explained how their networks were funded. I'd like to leave that for our closing session. I think it's a big issue where we can put questions to the panelists about how they fund their activities. So I think that's a point for the future. So I think I'll now open to the final panel session, which is about the research and teaching excellence and civic engagements, lessons for the UK. And we have a panel of experts here. Andres Rodriguez-Pose from the LSE, but working very internationally. Simon Collinson from the University of Birmingham, who's the Deputy PVC for Regional Engagement and Development and Director of City Ready, and Brooke Storer Church from the Office of Students, where she's the Head of Skills. And it's very good that we have a voice for the skills agenda in the UK with us today, because I think there's a danger that we entirely focus on the research. And what is a key message from this whole civic agenda is combining research, teaching, and community engagement. So if we could have the first speaker is going to be Andres Rodriguez-Pose. So Andres, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you very much for the invitation. I'm going to talk about the problems of the missions of the universities in how they actually contribute to this university industry type of relationship. And we all know that universities have three missions. One is teaching, the other one is research, and the third mission, which encompasses anything that stimulates and exploits knowledge for the development of society. And there's an assumption about these missions that when you have high quality research, when you have high quality education at university, you have a much greater capacity to generate knowledge and spillovers and transform the local production structure, thus generating innovation, productivity, employment, and growth. But of course, when you have different missions, you have different pressures, you have different sort of dimensions, and not all missions are rated equally for universities. And here's where you enter the ranking center. So for example, in recent years, we have become obsessed with the rankings, whether it is the Times Higher Education ranking or the QS ranking or any other, the Shanghai ranking, for example. Universities have become obsessed with scoring well in the rankings, and rankings prioritize one dimension, which is research. And research-intensive universities have the highest prestige. They are higher up in the rankings, and no university, of course, wants to be regarded as a second-class university in these rankings. So the problem with that is that the research mission has become the center stage for many universities, for most universities. And all this may hamper engagement with society and the creation of university industry collaborations, reducing the capacity for universities to influence in society and foster the development of society as a whole. So that raises a number of questions. The first one is, to what extent is pursuing a research-led strategy at university level, is it compatible with this third mission of the university? And does pursuing research excellence undermine the capacity of universities to collaborate with agents outside the university? And these are the questions that I've been doing research with colleagues, also like Raffaele Trapasso and Remer, mostly focus on what's happening in Scandinavian countries, Norway and Sweden. And what are we finding? We are finding that in these two countries, most universities have entered this rat race of doing well in the rankings, going for research excellence. But when you do that, the problem is that greater research excellence is linked to a lower local university industry collaboration, because it often creates a big gulf between the types of research that are being produced and the needs of local and national firms. There's no longer a connection between what is being done at the university, what's being researched, and the local environment. And the universities that actually seek and very often achieve success in research quality, they tend to, by and large, weaken their links with local and national firms in most cases. But it doesn't come with a benefit in terms of international relationships. We also find that in the case of Norway and the case of Sweden, universities that pursue research excellence do not seem to gain greater advantages in terms of promoting greater international collaboration with firms. So what does this lead? The idea of pursuing and putting all the emphasis, or a large percentage of the emphasis, on one dimension, which is excellence in research, might be desirable for society as a whole, but it's likely to widen the gap between the production of knowledge and the needs of local firms. So this sends a word of caution for this aim, this obsession with pursuing research excellence, for creating partnerships, because although research competition might be good, not all universities are have the same capacity to compete or can be at the research frontier. And more importantly, for the role of universities for development, especially in less developed areas of any country, is that pursuing research excellence can come at the price of a university's capacity to build bridges with local and national firms, to build bridges to society as a whole. And therefore, universities have to strike this very difficult balance. On the one hand, they need to think hard about, through the mix of activities that they do, through the mix of research and innovation, but also community extensions, how can they maximize the benefits to society as a whole, but also to the societies they are embedded in, their local societies. And this implies that, on the whole, different universities and different types of universities would need to pursue different mixes of objectives in order to achieve these goals. Not all universities in our countries can be a Harvard, they cannot all be an MIT. You can be a very good university that actually engages actively with your local community, and in this respect, fulfill a probably more important, let's say, mission that what is being done at the moment, in which many universities become stuck in no man's land. They cannot really compete with the top universities in terms of knowledge generation, but they no longer contribute to the same way as they probably could do to the development of their societies, because they're pursuing, let's say, research interests that are completely disconnected to what is happening at the local level.
Thanks very much. That's very insightful. A lot of big challenges there, which I'm sure Simon will pick up on in his next intervention. As I know there's an interest that he's been interested in. So can I give the floor to Simon Collinson?
Thanks very much, John, and thank you, Andres. It's a nice setup and a challenging setup, actually, about the relative contribution of different universities in different places, which is a complex mix, a portfolio, if you like, of very different growth potential in different regions globally, but also at very different levels of university alignment. And I want to come on to this idea of alignment between what a university produces and its connection or disconnect from what is locally needed. I mean, stepping back from Andre's absolutely right points, I mean, in general, there's a consensus that good universities bring some world-class research to help local challenges, and they do to a certain extent bridge the local and the global. So you draw on leading science and technology and thought leadership, from sustainable energy to vaccines, you know, and you have an impact locally as well as elsewhere. But there's another sense that I'd like to talk about and come on to talk about a bit about the work of City Ready in this sense. One of the things universities can do, and some do really well, which switches over to the social sciences and some of our work, is that they can help regions understand themselves better. And you can help universities how to improve their contribution. And that's a slightly different dimension, getting us into the policy game. And my argument here, in connection with the Civic Universities Network and this conference, is that any work done in this area improves the degree to which a university can consciously or purposefully set up a civic agenda and actually target its contributions to fit and align with what a region needs. Now, there's a general consensus putting a university in a place adds value. It can be done pretty unconsciously. There are employment multipliers, there's expenditure of students, there's economic knock-on effects that help regions, and in some cases don't help inclusivity. They may have displacement effects. But in general, there's added economic value, but some universities do this unconsciously. They're just there. And my argument here is that by improving their ability to consciously understand and target the gaps in the region and its potential to grow in certain ways, they're going to be more targeted and purposeful in their civic agenda. Now, the City Region Economic Development Institute, which I lead at Birmingham, and John's a fantastic colleague within that institute, we focus on the comparative analysis of city regions in the UK, but also globally. And we draw on international research models in the US, economic growth models. We develop case studies and comparative analysis to understand how places vary, how their challenges vary, what the growth potential is, and how interventions by policymakers can assist different kinds of growth, from inclusive growth, productivity, or better, more sustainable growth in regions. Regional policymakers and national policymakers have very limited resources to intervene to support growth. So they need to understand how to manage these trade-offs. And we at City Ready have developed a sort of toolkit, a set of frameworks to understand, this dilemma for policymakers. And in this really unusual year, we've worked even more closely with the LEPs, the Mayor's Office, the Combined Authority, and we've produced, for example, a weekly economic monitor to track how levels of COVID are affecting business performance and how the lockdown is affecting economic activity, but translating national data into regional impact with our understanding of how the region operates. And then there are knock-on effects from unemployment this year on household well-being and inclusivity. So we track a multidisciplinary set of data. We present that every week to a group of stakeholders chaired by the mayor, and we help shape interventions, decisions of how you support small businesses, how you help households get through this. And it's the application of intelligence through the shocks of Brexit and COVID, supporting policymakers in the region. So the point I'm making is, that intelligence brings another dimension to our work, which we're building up, which is to, address the specific question of, well, how do universities have an impact on their region? How can you develop science and technology, R&D programs that align, for example, with the innovation ecosystem, that fill gaps in the innovation needs of small firms or large firms within your region? How do you align what you do better? Well, one of the ways you do it is understanding more about your local ecosystem and how it works. The same thing applies to teaching programs. We have a massive demand-supply skills mismatch in the UK across the board, but also in specific regions. So how do you at the local level start to evolve teaching programs which are aligned better to those gaps? How do you understand the biggest challenges to low-income communities and align what you do as a civic university to those gaps? And I think this is about increasing precision and increasing targeting. And in a sense, what we hope to do through this whole exercise is to help other universities be more intelligent and focused about those interventions. Now, to finish, I just think, this conference, this particular session, and the international dimension of what we're doing is absolutely essential, in the sense that we can absolutely draw from huge experience of other universities in other places. Not all lessons are transferable, places are differ, but I think the network we're developing with the OECD and through the Civic University Network really adds value to the comparative dimension of these, improving the precision of our interventions and improving the precision of the way in which universities set about their civic university strategy. And I'll stop there. Thank you, John.
Thank you very much, Simon. And I think last but certainly not least, we heard again and again about the importance of skills and the role of students. And so I'd give the floor to Brooke Storrett-Church from Office for Students to tell us something about her work. Thank you, Brooke.
Thanks, John. Yeah, it's got to be important, doesn't it, if it's all in my job title and my organizational name. And thanks, everyone. It's been really, really interesting listening to all the preceding speakers. I think this question around the role of students, as well as the other topics we've covered, are so important to be talking about really right now. It is a very 2021 topic, although I would have argued it was a very 2020, 2019, 2018 topic as well. But the ground has really fundamentally shifted underneath us, and certainly here in the UK, as well as in other countries, I know we've seen that the pandemic has resulted in really significantly different impacts across different regions and different communities, depending on which ones you're talking about at the moment. So policymakers and those of us at a sector level in the university sector are really thinking about what and how we can work now to support rebuilding of those localities and regions, along with the industrial sectors that have been decimated as a result. Evidence of the important role that universities, and in particular their students, play is reflected in already a number of the initiatives that we have launched and that I oversee in my portfolio. So for a couple of examples, we currently see a £13 million fund to drive up the number of AI specialists into the labor market. That's being funneled directly through universities and colleges to pump prime those specialists out into the labor market. We have a £10 million fund at the moment to drive greater knowledge exchange, which is really about student engagement and knowledge exchange activities in local businesses and agencies. And we also have a £6 million fund out at the moment to improve employment outcomes for local graduates, those that study and look for work after study in their local area. So we have been hip to this issue, so to speak, but working at our level, kind of at the top down, it's all the more acute now, I think, on the what hopefully is the back end of the pandemic. We know that here in the UK, over 2/3 of the students who come through universities and colleges and study HE look for work after their degrees in their local area where they grew up. And actually almost half of them, just over 45%, never leave their local areas. So they look for a local university, they study there, and they have no intention of ever leaving that. For a while, we asked ourselves if that was a problem. And I think you could argue that there's something to be done to encourage greater graduate mobility. But really what it did for us was open our eyes to what was really a mistaken assumption, which is that here in the UK, we have a national graduate labor market, that as long as we get people into HE, they will then go where the jobs are, and therefore we'll be able to address the skills needs while also supporting greater equality of opportunity to access HE. But in fact, it's not that way. We have a variety of regional labor markets with lots of people interested in going to HE, but not wanting to leave where they are. So how do we make sense of that? And some of that exacerbates the point that Simon raised around that skills mismatch, but I won't say anything more about that at the moment. So from our view, it is really the students who are these engines of change and these engines of productivity, even in the sense all the way up to research, where of course you have academics and researchers, but who are driven often by technicians and students in their labs. We deal with kind of pre-research levels. So we're dealing with first degree or bachelor's degree students and master's students. We can see that in a couple examples, sorry, I'm just trying to bring up a couple of examples here. Examples to kind what I'm talking about. So we have supporting a program in the eastern part of England in Norfolk called the Gateway to Growth. And here students go out into SMEs in order to bolster those businesses, in order to gain really important work experience, and in order to gain a better sense of how they contribute to their local areas. This project in particular was really driven in order to try to bolster the local economy while also benefiting students themselves so that they would then be more employable as they would finish their degrees. There are a number of examples of this type of activity, which is made possible by the kind of pump priming funding that we've given, but it was because of the universities and colleges involved in these partnerships and their time and effort that they had put into developing those partnerships. I think something that Sheila mentioned earlier, it's time-consuming work, which is why we fund some of that work in order for universities to put in the time necessary to develop those businesses with SMEs, which make up over 90% of all employers in the UK. So again, it's easy to talk about the big graduate recruiters, but actually the majority of our graduates go to SMEs, and the majority of employers looking for them or needing to be shown that they can gain value from graduates are the SMEs in our local regions. KE is the same way, and some of these kind of overlap, but our broad projects around knowledge exchange, again, support work placements and graduate startups in order to benefit the students and the universities in question, but really to try to grow, to drive greater connections into their local economies. Going forward for the Office for Students in 2021, we are exploring how we can link this skills-based, place-based agendas, both of which are very high up on the government agenda at the moment, with the research and development strategies being developed. I know we've spoken a bit about the research and obviously innovation that comes out of universities, but those have been very disjointed in the UK. And what we need to do is to draw a much clearer pipeline, both a talent pipeline, a skills pipeline, and a synergy between these areas of university in order to drive those research and technology innovations into the local community and ensure that the local community has the skills and capability to adopt them, both as employers, but as a broader society in those places. We are developing our own new strategy for how we can support greater skills development and delivery in a post-pandemic economic recovery. And then we're also considering how all of these initiatives, in particular skills development and driving skills into localities, can also deliver on equality of opportunity. So we're also increasingly kind of dialing into, looking at where there are gaps in advantage, gaps in access for these types of opportunities, certainly where student groups are concerned, as that's one of our major strategic objectives. Thanks, John.
Thanks very much, Brooke. I think now we'll go to the final sort of panel session, and if we could have all the speakers in the room, as it were, and people put some questions in the Q&A into that discussion. Okay, and I'm going to chair that. And I wonder, have I got video? Yes, you can all see me. Can you all see me? I'm not sure if you can. Okay, the screen layout is quite tricky. Can we have everyone on the screen? Sure, I don't know how to organize that. That's it. Everyone's coming up. Okay, I'm going to now look at the Q&A and see what we've got. Very important question here from Greg Burke. How could government funding, this is for the UK speakers, support universities in their third missions? It's quite interesting from the US that there are a lot of federal funds which land grant and public universities have got together and bid for. Is there a scope from the perspective of those people who know the UK system for, as it were, bundling this all together? Or does it always have to be via project funding? What I found quite challenging is there's lots and lots of project funding, but how does that then get embedded into an ongoing stream of funding in both teaching and research? Would any of the panelists like to comment on how you fund the sort of networks and learning activities that you are doing? Just one of the panelists like to raise their hand, and I can't see you all. It's quite tricky. I can only see Brooke. Can anyone from the panel like to respond to this question?
Simon just raised.
John, I can have a go. I've got my hand up.
Yeah.
This is a dilemma. This is a challenge. The first thing is that the UK is one of the most centralized economies in the OECD in terms of decisions over funding, the resourcing of public sector and the spending. So first potential route might be to devolve further funding to local authorities so they can commission universities in collaboration with other local organizations and the private sector to do things that support the civic agenda within regions. That's one route. At yesterday's session, we had a vote on how the audience thought the government should be funding specifically innovation and R&D for inclusive growth in regions. And there was a very strong vote for more government money to go into translational mechanisms, which was about bridging between universities and local firms and organizations. But there remains a gap on the specific community support and the pure civic agenda. And I don't think there were many good ideas coming forward for how that should be funded. So I think it's a challenge.
Okay, I think that's a very important point. Is a question, I think, from Kevin Richardson, who's challenging me. So, Kevin, could someone unlock Kevin? I'm not sure I agree with the question. Why should we expect the state to fund the third mission? Why don't universities deliver more significantly on their charitable duty? Just a thought. Kevin, would you like to, I'll put that question on his behalf. This is about the whole notion of the third mission and working with a charity in the community and voluntary sector. And again, it'd be interesting to learn from the US members, what is the role of trusts, foundations, the sector that looks after the community in funding some of this activity, and how does it relate to the broadly sort of business orientated stuff? I still think we've got a bit of a gap between that business orientated support. Would anyone like to pick up on that? Jane had her hand up at one stage.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I was just going to respond to the question in terms of, I think, building on Simon's point. I mean, for me, I think it is quite problematic, the terminology of third mission. I think that actually thinking about our core purpose to benefit society is embedded in our teaching, education and research, and indeed how we act as anchor institutions and large organizations in our places. And I think we need to think about how we, through that kind of overall mission, we can actually mobilize core resources to support this activity and to work with our partners. So, let's think about what will the Shared Prosperity Fund look like. We've been working with colleges who are leading strategic development funds, skills accelerator bids, where we are partners. So the money will not flow through us as an institution, but we will be involved and it will deliver benefits in our place. So I think we need to think a bit differently about how we actually resource this sort of activity.
Would any other panelists like to comment? International perspective? Ben, would you like to comment?
Yeah, sure. I put a link in the chat to a concept that's come out of Arizona State University called the New American University, kind of more focused on service, expansion of access, and addressing civic priorities. I can say anecdotally, I've had a number of conversations with people who have chosen to opt against a tenured track route in academia in order to do projects that focus on their communities. And I think that false choice that in the American system that evidently we've created, where you would either be able to choose to pursue tenure or a tenure track position, or you could choose to have a focus on having an impact on your community from a research perspective, is very unfortunate. I think that this concept, the New American University, attempts to address that, but there are clearly systemic challenges. And I've also had conversations with people who are faculty members who have been told that they should pursue this kind of work once they get tenure, because it's when they're freed up from the rigor of that process. And it just makes absolutely no sense. And it's something that we should think about addressing. I know organizations like APLU are probably positioned to be more, or the institutions in their organization are positioned to be more civically focused. And so I think there's opportunities to leverage those type of efforts to address that.
Thank you very much. I think we're running out of time, and I'm sorry
There's
about
Sheila that wants to add something.
Okay, Sheila.
Yeah, I just wanted to say there are really strong movements in the United States to change the promotion and tenure processes to incorporate things like engagement and innovation and entrepreneurship. And I've put a couple of those in the chat. I also want to say that we do know that engagement as part of the teaching mission strengthens outcomes for students. They're more likely to complete their degrees if they have been engaged through their education. And also engaged research is more likely to attract funding because our national funding organizations are requiring that we develop and implement broader impact statements, and the engagement professionals can really help scientists learn how to have better engaged research. And so that is how we are really pushing institutions to think about how these three missions are intertwined and reinforce each other rather than being separate.
Thanks very much indeed. Now we've got a poll which I think the office will put up. Which could we have the poll, please, Helen or Shireen? It's a very simple question. Should the Civic University Network seek to proactively shape UK government policy in order to ensure the civic role of universities locally and globally? Choose one, but if yes, put ideas into the Padlet discussion board. I've put this up because one of the issues that's emerging from this conference, and we've got no time really to discuss it, is being the role of the universities in actually agenda setting in an area which is quite politically charged. I think we've learned that from the US about the tensions within the US civil society. It's true in the UK as well. We have huge polarizations, and many of these questions are political with a big P. And it's the extent to which the Civic University Network should engage. And if they do that, does that then undermine their role as so-called neutral practitioners in between and not involved in the world of politics? This is a very tricky question. We could spend hours debating on it. I'm just asking people to think about this briefly and then vote on it. So just a couple of minutes, I'll shut up and begin to poll on that. I've got a very clear view about it, and I'm going to fill my question in. I think they should. Kevin has come out on the screen. What do you think, Kevin?
Just a quick comment, John. Can you hear me?
Yes.
First of all, to thank all of the contributions today. It's been a superb session. I've got a couple of very short comments to make. First of all, directed to Steve and Sheila. Obviously, your system has many differences to ours, but at its heart, it's structurally very similar. What do you think are the fundamental organizational reasons why American universities perhaps can be regarded as having much more extensive community engagement than universities in England? And interestingly, there's very little cross knowledge, and this picks up on comments made by Raphael. There's very little cross knowledge between what happens here and what happens elsewhere. I was struck when reading Stephen's book about this time last year, just how little we in the UK know about the land grant system. So what are the reasons why there are so little cross knowledge, and how do we address them? And one final and timely specific question: Joe Biden has introduced legislation in the US to extend the franchise of free college tuition for all American citizens, to give 2 years free of charge at a community college. How will that likely impact the role of traditional 4-year universities in its civic mission?
Well, I'm going to intervene because I don't think we have time to ask people to answer that question. And I will just sum up with one major point, which Kevin touched upon. The UK system is very much based on competition. bidding for funds, competing, creating league tables. And that culturally is at the heart of some of the problems we face. We have an act, the Higher Education Act, which embeds competition in the system. The Office for Students is a competition regulator. So how do we move forward in this space, I think depends on, and it came up very strongly in the sustainability session that Des chaired. And that was really, basically, we need to revisit it. We need a new form of Higher Education Act, which isn't predicated on competition and market regulation. That's a highly political statement, but I think we can't avoid that in the UK. And I will probably get told off from saying that in a public arena, but nevertheless, that is my closing remarks. So thank you very much, everyone. We've gone over time, and it's one of the rules of this
John,
game.
if I say something, just to, because we have discussed about cooperation and collaboration, but we lacked a little bit the counterparts. So it would be interesting if this kind of discussions among higher education institutions could be enriched by a little bit of diversity. What is clear is that we need a paradigm shift in terms of capacity to collaborate. If it's not funding, at least it's not perverse incentives, but we need some guidance, perhaps, from the political, administrative level of places. And this would be important, I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a very strong point. Collaboration and I think some competition is helpful as well, but it's how you balance competition and collaboration. I think we could go on for a long time. We need to see some way of sustaining this conversation, because I think Kevin's made a very important point. We are not learning lessons from across the pond in the UK. I hope we've seeded a process that will go on, and I do hope that OECD will help facilitate further discussions on these lines. There's now a final set of multiple choices here, which is going to every part of every session. We're asking people to respond to that. If you can hold that and respond to it before we close it down, that would be helpful. And if you want to add anything, do go to the Padlet on the conference board and add your comments. I found it very helpful and very inspiring, and I really like to thank our contributors from outside the UK for this conversation. So thank you very much, and have a good rest of the day. So bye for now.
Thank you.